From the Gulf States newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm managing editor Ryan Vasquez, chopping it up this week. Farmers across the Mississippi Delta are facing a tough reality this year, growing crops that are worth less than what it costs to produce them. For some rice farmers, that's led to a question that seems to defy logic. What do you do with millions of pounds of a crop you can't sell? A recent report from the New York Times highlights just how deep the problem has become, with some farmers even considering letting their crops rot. But what does that look like on the ground in Mississippi? And what's driving this crisis right now? Public health reporter Drew Hawkins sat down recently with Kevin Draper, who covers the agriculture industry for the New York Times. In this week's episode, Draper tells us about what he found from his time reporting in the Delta.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for sitting down and talking with me today.
Of course, happy to do it.
So, I really want to start with this question about what surprised you most about your reporting in the Mississippi Delta? Because I don't believe maybe you're from the area or have been there super often. And on top of that, reporting on rice specifically rather than farming more broadly, which is something I know you cover often.
Yeah, I'm in the Midwest. I can drive a half hour any direction from where I am and run into a farmer. And given that problems for farmers are pretty common nationwide, I'm sure I could find somebody who would tell me, yeah, sure, I'll show you my farm. It is hard out here. But sort of what attracted me, what I think is interesting about Mississippi is just that historically, what is really good there is you can grow so many things. The climate allows you to grow effectively anything. I'm up here in the Midwest, and it's only corn and soybeans, maybe a little bit of wheat. But in Mississippi, you grow cotton, you grow rice. If you really want, you can grow strawberries, apples, whatever one might want to grow in Mississippi. Except nothing's making money. So it doesn't really matter if you can grow anything when anything, nothing makes money. And so that's sort of, I think, what attracted me to try to do Mississippi, or, I suppose it could have been Arkansas or something like that, but sort of go to a place where it's sort of a little bit of a different or a unique spin on the challenges that farmers everywhere are facing.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question, which is, what are some of those differences between farmers in the Mississippi Delta and other places? How does a rice collapse land differently in the Delta than, like a soybean downturn in the Midwest? And that's both maybe economically and culturally as well.
Right. Sort of economically, the Delta generally, it is more expensive to grow crops there than it is in the Midwest. In the Midwest, you can have this, 600, 800 acre farm that essentially one person, with a good tractor they can farm it all. But you can't do that in the Delta, in large part because the planting and harvesting windows are so narrow. That's where the warm weather sort of that can help you grow stuff is bad. You've got to get the plants in the field in the spring when there's a lot of rain, and so you often have a very narrow window to do so, and so you need a lot of bodies out there doing it. Whereas in the Midwest, you have a much longer time frame, and so one person can do it over weeks as opposed to a crew doing it over a day or two. And same thing when harvesting. You've got to get the harvesting done much faster, and so the Delta, everything is more expensive there. The benefit, sort of as I said earlier, is you can grow more things, and so sitting there in the winter or spring, you can go, and so in the Delta you can sort of hedge, and yes, costs are higher, but often you're getting more for your crop because you're sort of better timing, what will sell well in the market. Except for right now, when everything is in the Delta, or every crop, is in the basement.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about farmer bailouts here. You mentioned rice specifically as well. When President Trump announced his tariff relief plan, sitting next to him at the roundtable discussion, the presentation of that was a rice farmer representative from North Louisiana, from the Mississippi Delta area.
Ooh, we could do an entire episode on federal farm policy, and the administration passed. They didn't pass; they just did an $11 billion of bailout for row crops. There's another $1 billion set aside for sort of fruits and vegetables that is being worked through now. They did this out of sort of a special fund at the Department of Agriculture, so they did not have to get congressional. They didn't need to get a bill passed. And it's sort of unclear exactly how they did it, but they sort of calculated how much farmers are losing for each of these individual crops. And then per acre you grew of that crop, they sort of have a payment rate to farmers to hopefully help stabilize them. And even though a lot of it sort of grew out of frustrations with the administration's trade war in China, and specifically soybean farmers whose soybeans were not going to China, it is not a soybean or sort of China tariff bailout. It doesn't seem. It is sort of a across the agriculture sector, and so they have these rates for each acre, how much they'll pay you. The government will pay you for what you grew, and rice and cotton sort of have the highest payments for any crop, as those two crops, at least right now, sort of farmers are taking the biggest bath on them. And so money's going to be start rolling out, I don't know, I think next month. And it'll help. And every farmer submitted, the information or data they needed to the government to get that payment. But pretty universally, everyone says it's not going to make a substantial difference.
I'd like to know maybe if you do end up going back to the Delta, maybe in a couple of years or so, what would you be looking for as signs that things are either stabilizing or maybe unraveling even more?
There's some of the easy things you can do from afar. You can go look at farm bankruptcy filings, and if farm bankruptcy filings are going up, probably things are going poorly. But I think probably two big things. Sort of one is the infrastructure. One of the reasons a lot of farming in the Delta is getting harder is that the infrastructure is going away. I mentioned earlier there's maybe one rice mill, maybe a couple more, but there's far fewer rice mills than there used to exist. Cotton processing operations are the same. These things matter for giving farmers choices for where, hey, these guys are offering this much money for my cotton or my rice or my corn. Those guys a little farther down the road are offering a little more. Where should I sell it to? You have fewer options, or perhaps you need to truck it farther, or the port, on the Mississippi River to get it down to New Orleans sort of is the only option. And so one is sort of has that infrastructure, further eroded? Are there fewer, corn elevators? Are there fewer rice mills, or whatever it may be? And then the other one is, has anything changed with scale? Has anyone figured out a way that you can make a lot of money on 500 acres, or only 40 acres of some specialty, high grossing crop, or sort of has the trend, which is not limited to farming. I mean, this is, I think, probably most areas of the American economy. It's sort of a huge race to scale. And in most places, there are fewer and fewer companies until there's two or three or four that are sort of the dominant ones that control the vast portion of the market share. You can look at banking, you can look at social media or technology. With AI, we're probably going to end up with, a couple giant ones. Has somebody figured out a way to stop that and make it so that if you have a little bit of money, you can get a few acres and make a living, or do something like that? But I think that's going to take some pretty radical change. And then the other reason, we talked about sort of big federal farm policy. And if there's sort of one dominant thing that sort of connects all these weird different programs in federal farm policy, I think it's sort of a cheap food policy, which is that they want food as cheap as you can get it. And, you know, to some degree, for farmers to get paid more, you and I and everybody needs to pay more for our food. And so are Americans willing, or can they economically, especially sort of if you don't have a lot of money, you know, can you pay 12 or 13 or 14% of your paycheck for food instead of 10%? And, you know, those few extra percentage points go into the million farmers in the country's pocket. I don't know. That's a pretty big and radical change for that to happen. There have to be a reorientation of federal policy and how we think about what we want as a society.
Hmm. Kevin Draper is a business correspondent covering the agriculture industry for the New York Times. Kevin, thanks so much for talking with us about your reporting in the Mississippi Delta.
Of course, it was great talking with you.
Wait, before you go, because I know you spent a lot of time in the area, we have a segment at the end of our show called Gulf States Gems. And the idea is that we highlight some of the treasures of the regions, landmark, restaurant, bookstore, whatever you want. So I want to ask you, what would you say is your Gulf States gem from your time in the Mississippi Delta?
So I don't know that everybody would think of it as a gem, or maybe think of it differently, but I'm going to go with Cleveland Donuts, which is a little hole-in-the-wall donut shop in Cleveland. I couldn't tell you much about it. I just happened to see it as I was driving. And it had what to me makes something a good donut shop. Yes, the donuts, you would like them to be high quality. But there were a couple guys in there that were older, and they were just sipping some coffee out of a styrofoam coffee cup. And that to me is what makes something a good donut shop. If there's not a bunch of old guys that probably were there for like 4 hours starting at 6 a.m. because they're retired, and that's what they do. If you don't see that in a donut shop, it is not a good donut shop. And this is what I just happened to on the side of the road while driving by, and the donuts were good and the ambiance was correct.
I love that.
Cleveland Donuts.
Yeah, I love that you know the mood is right when the company's right, and I love that it's one that you kind of just stumbled upon. You weren't really looking for it.
Yeah, I'm out on the road. I try to eat a little bit healthier than just shoving donuts in my face. But I was going to meet someone. I go, and they were at an office. I was like, okay, I could bring a few donuts for the office, and be a nice welcoming gift. But it's my version of the sort of if you eat in a restaurant with food from a different country, hopefully you see people of that ethnicity in that restaurant. That tells you something about the authenticity, or that people who really know that food have decided it's good, and we will go there. And older guys are the version of that for donuts.
That's great. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Kevin, and thanks again for coming on and talking with us.
Of course.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Ryan Vasquez. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your brew.